This week's episode has been sponsored by Oh My Bod, shifting the evolution of pleasure. Hi, I'm Suzanne, and you're listening to Sex Advice for Seniors. And I'm here today with Ralph Greco, who is a writer. He is a teacher, and he specifically works mainly in the adult space, and he's the co-host of a popular podcast that I love the name of called Licking Non-Vanilla. And unsurprisingly, we're going to talk about all things kinky and old. Kinky and old. Welcome, Ralph. So what does
Well,
kinky
thank you,
actually even mean? What does it
man.
mean
You
to
know that.
be kinky?
Wow, that's a loaded question, right? I mean, everybody has a different definition of that. Same with when you say non-vanilla sex, which would be anything that's a little beyond the norm. But then, what is norm?
Who
I
knows?
don't know. It's hard for me to say. Maybe it's just lifting our fantasies made to another level beyond just normal. Again, I hate to use the word normal. What conventional canoodling, let's say, beyond just everyday, humping.
Beyond everyday humping.
Hump,
I think that should be a name of
humping.
another podcast.
Yeah, beyond everyday hump. Actually, I love that country band. That's one of my favorite country bands of all time. Beyond everyday humping. Ladies and gentlemen, it's beyond everyday humping. Anyway,
Yeah, and I guess what that means for me is that, beyond kind of the missionary position, beyond
exactly,
like doggy style,
exactly,
popular positions that most people engage in, right? Like
exactly.
spooning, missionary, doggy style, on top, she's on top, he's on top, la 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 la. Would involving toys be considered kinky or not
I
really?
guess I don't know. I mean, I a lot of people that I know intimately in my life or just know in general use toys. I don't know. I mean, I think also another thing, maybe kinkiness would be arousal without copulation, arousal even without orgasm.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Hmm.
And as we become older people, arousal with no orgasm is definitely something that I'm very familiar with. I think it took me
Hmm.
about 55 minutes to come on my own this morning. I almost fell asleep again. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, it's the same for men. I mean, and it's a thing that I think older men need to take into consideration, as do their partners, that it's going to take some time where it didn't before.
yeah.
And sometimes within the play of being kinky and BDSM games and all that kind of stuff, you can have a lot of fun, a lot of sensuous fun, and a lot of tactile adventures without worrying so much about got to get direction, got to get everybody wet, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
of
think
course.
a lot of that and kinkiness, a lot of that goes on in the mind as well, you know.
Definitely. And how'd you get into this stuff?
Wow. I guess from my earliest awareness, I've always been interested in specific kind of things that, when you're younger, you're thinking, man, am I the only person thinking this stuff? And then you slowly, and it's, back in the day when I grew up, there wasn't internet. So I couldn't just go on the internet and find people that were like, oh yeah, I'm into the same stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not a lifestyler really. I just have some interests and slowly into my late teens, into my 20s when I started dating, I found some like-minded ladies that were interested. I'm a hetero male, and
Uh-huh.
some that weren't, and just kind of made my way.
Yeah, were you back in the days of where you had to send off photos into PO box numbers?
Oh yeah.
Are we going back that far, Ralph?
Oh, we're going back to when I went to school. You couldn't go at night because electricity wasn't invented. So, yeah, we're going way back here, and to find that material was very difficult. I
Oh,
remember like what they would call underground newspapers and
yeah.
magazines, and maybe you get a hint of it in a Penthouse, not a Playboy. But basically, if you had like a little interest or a penchant for something that was a little unusual, it wasn't the easiest thing to find, for sure, for
No.
sure.
No,
Yeah.
and I think, when I speak to people that were in any of the kinky lifestyles back in the day, and we're talking like 80s, 90s, right?
Mhm.
Before the internet, like
Yeah,
pre-internet, like for all
yeah,
of the people who remember that time of the
right.
world. Um, when they talked to me about finding like-minded people back then, honestly, it was such a long involved process that they always tell me that by the time they'd sent the photos that had to be processed at the special shop, because nobody would process
Right.
the photos at your normal drugstore, right?
Or
So you had to
your
go
or
get
photo mat, right? Yeah. Hmm.
no, so you had to
Yeah.
send the negatives off to be
Hmm.
processed, and then that
Hmm.
would take weeks, and then they
Hmm.
would come back, and then you had to post it to a PO box, and then somebody at the other end had to look at the picture and go, "Yeah, all right, that's kind of cool." And
Hmm.
then they had to send their picture and do the same
Hmm.
shit again, and then
Hmm.
send that off. This could go on. This could take months, right? I mean,
Yeah.
every guy I've ever spoken to has said that by the time a meet actually took place, they'd almost like orgasm before they didn't
Well,
even.
well, it's funny you say that. I mean, you think about the process itself is arousing. The
Yeah,
anticipation is arousing, and I think back when I was doing most of my heavy core dating was probably early '80s, late
yeah,
'70s, early '80s. And what was fun about back then, and I say this all the time, was we had the ability to sniff each other out easier,
yeah, yeah,
or the interaction of that kind of play where you didn't just flip on a phone and scroll. You had to go and actually sniff out another person. That gave you a lot of just experience and just in that in general. And I talked to men and women of my age, and we all seem to have got through that time, and we had a great time. We had a really good time. Whether you were kinky or not, it doesn't matter. But like what you're saying, that long process of the getting to know somebody and all that anticipation was certainly part of the fun of it, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
now here we are
Oh
in
yeah. Oh, here we
in
are.
our 60s in the
Oh.
on the flip side of all that, which I don't know what it is like for you, but for me, it's that whole experience of being a candy store is well over. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why are there so many time wasters? Why are so many people pretending to be something that they're not? Why does it take so much time to filter through all of this stuff?
Maybe only because there's more options now. Maybe
Yeah.
that's the only thing I can think of, that there's more options. But and some people, unfortunately, even when you get into your 60s, some people do tend to enjoy the drama of things more than anything else.
Yeah.
So there's that too. And I think social media engenders a kind of almost a narcissism, in that this is I could bring everything to me a la carte, so it's me, and maybe I don't reach out as quickly as I should, or don't make the connect relationships. I don't know. I really don't know. I know that I'm not that way. You obviously are not that way yourself.
No.
In all aspects of my existence, I don't like any kind of drama unless I'm going to see a stage show. I don't want drama in my life. And I don't want it with friends or anybody. So I tend to avoid that if I can, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, and I think that's so that's the interesting thing, I think, right, about becoming like you and I have obviously been around the block a few times and gone back to the early days, but for
Hmm.
a lot of people in their 60s, they might be exploring this stuff for the first time,
True.
right?
True.
So they've maybe had a fantasy that they've been clinging on to for
True.
years. Maybe their partner said, I don't really want to have a threesome,
Hmm.
actually. I don't really want to do that. I don't really want BDSM. I don't want that. I'm
Right.
just really happy in my little vanilla world. And maybe that relationship hasn't worked out for whatever reason. And now
Hmm.
there's this
Hmm.
big bad space of thinking, right, I can do this now. I can do this.
Hmm.
So what's the common stuff that you see that you come across with older people wanting to engage with kink at this stage of life if they've never done it before?
Well, first and foremost, I think, and you just tickled this a little bit when you were saying this, but is the expectation of what it's going to be as opposed to what it does end up being. And there's no way of ever knowing.
No.
And you can't get thrown by that if you try something with somebody and like, oh, I've had this fantasy for years, let's try this, and you get into it and it doesn't work out exactly the way you think it's gonna. That's fine. Take your time, communicate, and see ways around. Don't jettison the whole thing completely out of hand because it didn't work out. And I think that would be the first thing, the concept of in your mind of what it might be, especially if it's something like you said you built up over a long time in your head, and all the mechanizations and the circus nets and all that stuff, and you get there and you're like, oh, this isn't anywhere near, because it never is going to be what it is in your head anyway. So that's
No.
the first thing. And then secondly, second, well, first, of course, is consent. You don't get there without consent, right? And then
Right.
secondly, I would, and then maybe the third, the other point I just said, and maybe third, you just, and I think this is all built into it, communication and realizing that, and then also sometimes you get into something, it doesn't exactly go where you want to go, but it goes somewhere else, and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that,
Yeah.
and be open to that too. You're like, oh, all of a sudden, I wasn't exactly wanting to call her mommy, but now I am, and she's liking that. Where, I what and you know how when that happens too. With this, we used to say this a lot of time with men in their first experiences with anal. Men of my generation, their first experience with anal was always like earth shattering because it meant something else. And
Yeah.
it didn't mean anything other than you like that feeling. But anyway, so don't if this thing all suddenly becomes on calling her mommy, oh, I'm on infantilism and that's and I haven't come to terms with my mother. It doesn't mean any of that shit. It doesn't mean any of that. Just enjoy what it is. Don't worry about what you think it is and why you're doing it. Like all that stuff gets in the way. So I would say those are the 3 points, if that makes any sense, and it probably doesn't.
Yeah, and
Probably
I
covered
think
for me.
that's the funny thing about role playing. I'm not going to tell you my own personal story about that because it's actually a little bit too, yeah, I want to keep
Oh,
that
come on.
one.
Oh, come on. We're all friends here. You and I go way back.
So I had this partner once,
Mhm.
and for some reason, I just came out with daddy,
Right.
like, in that moment. He was much, much younger than me, like
Okay.
to the point where people sometimes thought he was my son when we were going out, right?
Oh, that's so hot.
But,
That's so hot. That's
but
so
for some
fantastically hot.
reason, it was really hot. I've never done it with anybody since. I'm I'm kind of a little bit like there's a part of me that thinks, "Oh, but that was so hot. Maybe I could just like maybe that word could just like slip out again." But then I
Yeah,
think,
good luck trying
"Oh,
that.
I
Forcing
think
that.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, the situation was with that particular person, and I think this is true of like so many of these fantasies um that sometimes seem completely inappropriate. Like you said, when you call somebody your mom or your dad or whatever, it doesn't have to mean anything
I mean,
other
shit.
than, it just means shit, right? It's
No, it
just
just means what you're doing at the moment. Why? That's the thing with this stuff. Is that you have to imbue it with all this like this other crazy shit. Then you're yeah. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean
yeah,
to cut you off.
so at that time I was like, I didn't imbue it with anything. I just thought it
Yeah.
was really hot and it worked. And he went along with it, which is good because he didn't
Great.
look at me like, are you insane?
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
like,
Right.
like,
Do you
I
know how
think
old I am?
like you're my mom. Like, let's get this straight,
Right.
right?
Right. If we're gonna do
But
this, let's go there at least. Yeah. Right. That's funny. That's
but
very funny.
but the main thing was, and the main thing about all of this stuff is, and it relates back to consent, but also relates to trust, right? Like
Of
for
course.
me, the kink, like I'll go to real extremes if I really trust someone, like
Of
if I
course.
really really trust someone. And that means that some of the little tips that we always say in the kinkster world about this the stoplight system, like red, orange, amber, green, like if
Right.
you're it's like if
Degrees
it's
of severity.
all that stuff about if it's impact play, i.e., like spanking, flogging, whipping, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I've enjoyed that from time to time, but I've learned that the people that I enjoy it with the most are people who are highly skilled because I'm not really a pain person. So for me, it's like take me up with the endorphins really, really slow. So by the time you get to the intensity, it's almost like I don't feel, it's not a huge shock to me. So, but I also know that those people, if it did become too much, I'd just go red, red, and
Yeah.
they'd
Yeah. Yeah.
stop, right? They wouldn't go, oh, red actually means green. No, fucker.
Right, right. No,
Red
no, fucker.
means
Red is
red.
red. Yeah, right. You
Right?
see this? You see the color I'm wearing and what color you're wearing? That's what I mean. Yeah.
So that's the other thing is like make sure if you're going to mess around with this stuff, there's a high degree of trust between the two
Oh,
of
I mean 100% because on a physical level, yeah, if you're impact play or being tied up, I mean a million things, right? But
you.
then
Yeah,
on an emotional level too, like you could say something or intimate something, and the other person gets, whoa, whoa, where are we going here? But like,
exactly.
there's a lot of in humiliation play too, and I don't like to take degradation because I don't truck of that, but humiliation play. you
Yeah.
have to trust somebody enough to know they're playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
When they're measuring your whatever and they're saying you're too small and all the stuff that you've heard, but or
Yeah.
calling you a slut or what, I mean, however you want to go,
Yeah.
that's fine. But if you trust somebody within the parameters, they're playing with you. You're having a good time and everything's fine. They're not really truly assessing you in the way you think they are. So again, this goes back to trust, consent, not letting it get away from you in the sense that if I did something and it really didn't turn out to be so great, I never want to do it again. There's another thing too that we didn't brush on, and you that I'm just thinking of too, and I'm sure you actually said this. There are some people that you're fine doing certain things with. Other people you don't,
Yeah.
and sometimes I don't even know why that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that happens too. But you may have a fantasy that you're thinking of, and you come across a new lover or post divorce or whatever, and you're charged up with the fantasy, but this person just for whatever reason you can't get it up for them to do it to you or do it with.
Yeah.
And that gets well, I really like this person. In fact, I love this person. I'm really sexually attracted to this person, but I don't have a kink thing for this. Doesn't mean anything. It just means you do. And I can't tell you a million people that I've been woefully sexually attracted to. Nothing happened kinky. And other
Yeah.
people that I'm like, nah. And all of a sudden it's like it fires all pistons. I
Yeah.
don't know. But this is things you learn as you get older, that this is the way life is,
Yeah, and I think one of the aspects of being an older person and being, single or single-ish, however you want to describe
Mhm.
yourself, is that we have the opportunity, if we want to, and if we're emotionally capable of it, of having partners that fulfill different needs for us, right?
Mhm.
You can have,
Mhm.
I had a conversation with a woman who does a podcast called Open Nesters, and her partner's really into BDSM and she's not. She
Mhm.
likes walking naked in nature and he doesn't. So
Mhm.
she's like, okay, cool. You go off with Sandy and you go and get into your role play stuff, kinky role play, BDSM stuff. And I'm going to go off with Eric and we're going to go walking naked in the woods. Right.
Right.
And
No,
he's like, off you go then. And she's like, how was it with Sandy? And he's like, yeah, it
yeah,
was loads of fun. Right. And they've
right.
been married 27 years and stuff. So this stuff is also, I mean, the other thing I would say is that if you can develop your communication skills between yourself and your partner, whether they're new, long term, whatever, you can renegotiate this shit. You can, I mean, people
Absolutely.
say, oh, but I can't. Like, what if I get rejected? What if they hate me and want to
Yeah.
divorce me? Well, I mean, there's always that risk, but I think it is possible to renegotiate this stuff.
Well, I mean, I would think, and we all learn this as we get older, is that your perspective changes all the time, and we're constantly changing. I mean, I say this all the time. People think I'm being facetious, but I really don't know shit. The older I get, the less I know. And people say, well, that's just bullshit. But I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with experience. It has the fact that I say all the time, like the snow globe is shaking all the time. I have no idea. I kind of know what I want. I know what's going on around me, but even that is thrown off by new experiences, new people you meet. So
Yeah.
yes, why couldn't you that thought, keeping that thought in your head, why couldn't you renegotiate in every level, on everything? I'm not saying that life has to be that nebulous, but I think that we need to be that open to the possibilities that, because as we know, we all know, the older you get, the more stuck in your ways you can certainly get.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing about kink play, maybe allows you to be not as stuck in your ways, maybe. And then again, there's other people like, I'm only doing this, I'm only getting spanked, that's all I'm ever going to do, that's all I'm ever going to, whatever you want to do.
I
All
think
the,
that's very true. I think one of the greatest things about when you look at all the alternative lifestyles out there, and I sort of classify most of them as some form of kink,
yeah, I got you.
swinging or BDSM or role, whatever.
Yeah, I got you.
It's all kind of comes under the kink umbrella for me. I think that once you open that Pandora's box and you see what's out there, the couples that I know that have been together the longest, that seem the happiest to me, are the ones where there's no limitations on this stuff. it's where they're willing to go like, hey, let's go to this party this weekend and check out what's happening. Let's see what's
Hmm.
going on. And like you say, you go there, you're like, oh God, really? That was kind of
Right, right,
sucky, right?
right,
I don't think I'm going to do that again. Or, oh, maybe we need to try a different party, or maybe we
right.
need to try something different. But the buffet's wide open,
Yeah.
and we know that our bodies are not functioning in the same way. So as you said, some of the benefits for me of like, impact play is like, I'm not thinking about having an orgasm. I'm just enjoying the different sensations. I'm just thinking, oh, this is kind of cool. This is interesting. I'm kind of enjoying the tension, the anticipation, the power dynamic,
Hmm.
whatever it
Yeah.
happens to be. I'm just kind of going, oh, but do I want that flavor of ice cream every day of the week?
Right. That's a good point. That's a very good
No,
point.
I
Yeah.
don't. I
No,
don't.
no, I don't want. And yeah, I don't want. It's funny. I used to have a roommate. It was a great guy. I love this guy, and he would say to me, "Yeah, but like, say you like Coca Cola, and you really love Coca Cola, and you just want to drink Coca Cola all the time. It's what's so bad about having Coca Cola all the time?" I'm like, well, I see your point, and you could be very comfortable drinking Coca Cola, but I'm somebody who, and I love Coca Cola, but after a while, I don't want to just drink Coca Cola. But then again, also, with the point should be made, and you've already made this point, but I think it should be made that and and if you're not someone inclined to kink, that's fine too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. Or if you're someone who's been inclined to kink for 20 years, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm done with kink.
Yeah, that's
You
fine.
know,
Yeah.
that's or I've never done any of this stuff, and I wake up at 62 years old going, you know what? I want a woman to peg me. That's fine too. You know, like I just don't. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm the same way. My sensibilities are the same way with any opinion of anything, whether it
Yeah.
be religion or politics, which are, it's interesting. We say these things all the times. You and I are talking sexual right now.
Yeah.
But when we grew up, what were the things you didn't talk about? Sex, religion, politics, and in mixed company, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays everybody talks about everything because we can. But I have this opinion that I don't really care what your opinion is. Not that I don't care about your opinion, I care. But at the end of the day, I'm really not going to change my opinion. So go forth.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do, go with God, but whatever you want to believe in. But my point is that, so if you want to be kinky, be kinky. You don't want to be kinky, don't be kinky. It's
Yeah, I
fine with
mean,
me.
I met somebody when I was living out in Spain, and he said to me, actually, I just have like two rules, which is just like be kind to people.
Yeah.
Don't abuse old ladies, don't fiddle around with kids, you know. Uh
Yeah, yeah, and yeah,
and
yeah.
just be generally decent
I'm
human
with you,
being,
man.
right? Like,
I'm
but
100%
anything
with
else
you.
you want to do, if you want to eat your own cum or whatever, I don't care. Like,
I'm the same way. I'm with you with the rules. Like, don't fuck with kids, man.
yeah.
Yeah, don't fuck and with animals because animals can't consent either. What the fuck is that about, right? And then, like, yeah, like generally be nice. Like, don't be a dick. We say it all the time. Just don't be a dick. I mean, it's like it's not really that difficult not to be a dick because it's that old adage. Like, if you don't have something nice to say, then don't say it. Just walk away. Like.
No, no,
But you're
no.
right. But as far as like what you want to do with all that your personage, or you want to put on your personage, or you want to take out of your personage, or put, I don't care. It's not
Yeah,
that I don't care about you. I care about you as a human being. But if you're fine with what you're doing, and like you said, you have consenting partners that you
yeah,
trust,
exactly.
and you're hygienic and you're safe and all stuff.
Just
Have
go,
at it.
just go for it. I
Yeah.
mean, the other struggle that I hear a lot is, well, there's a few, like a guy wrote to me the other day and he said, I have prostate cancer and, and obviously he was going to have erectile dysfunction, right? Because that's
Mhm.
just what happens.
Comes with
And
it.
they,
Yeah,
and they get,
unfortunately.
and they get really stuck in their head about what does that mean for my sex life? Because of course their entire sex life has been all about penetration. And,
Exactly.
this is the time I think that people should be looking at kink as that's what you should be looking at, right? You should be looking at the
Exactly.
things that you can do that don't necessarily always have to involve your dick, or where you can pleasure your partner in all sorts of other ways that don't, I think, the medical profession doesn't really address kink, sadly, but
No,
kink.
they
Oh,
and it no, and you're right. The thing about a hard dick thing always becomes that's the measure of it. It doesn't have to be, right?
no, and I think one of the benefits for me of kink is that when you do have, I've met people within the kink community that are disabled. I've met
Right.
people within the kink community that have, can't get their dick hard. I've met
Mhm.
all sorts of people who have a really joyful approach to pleasure in all its functions and all its
Yeah.
ways because they've got a much more expansive view and they haven't let their limitations, their physical limitations, stop them from experiencing pleasure. And I don't know how it is in the States, but I know that for me, the kink community has always been incredibly inclusive when it
Mm.
comes to
I'd say it's true.
disability generally. I just
I would
say,
say I would say that's true from what I've seen. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, they're I've always said this. I mean, and it sounds cliche in a way, but some of the easiest, nicest, most amiable folks I've ever met has been at a, somebody with a pony mask out at a kink convention.
yeah,
I mean, they're usually the kind of people that are pretty approachable. They love talking about what they're doing. They love learning something new, and they're
yeah,
just nice, open people, and they're just doing their thing. Like,
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I hate to be that. I hate to be that because it just sounds like a false equivalency. Like, oh, kink people are the best people in the world. Like I feel like it's like Barbara Streisand. People who love people. But what it comes down to, though, really, I do find that, and I think because maybe we're slow. I don't know. I don't know what. There's a million reasons for it, of course. But I totally agree with it. There's other ways around things, of course. And if you think about not taking your dick out of the equation, but at least have it be part of
Yeah,
everything else, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because as men, younger men, when I was in my 20s, that's all that mattered. Was mattered, but getting that hard in some place, where the
yeah,
place didn't matter where the place was, my hand, and her breast didn't matter.
yeah,
But you learn over time that like that's all wonderful, but like that's not all there is to life, right? I mean, in sex or life in general. So yeah, and as well as I do, kink is a lot in the mind. It's a lot of
yeah.
mental. Yeah.
And and sadly, and again, I don't know if this is a cliche, but the kinkiest people I've known have been people that don't have very mentally taxing jobs.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
So
Well, they always say that too. There's always that. The guy who really wants to be dominated is guy who has a high endy kind of job where he's guy or girl where they're constantly making decisions,
yeah,
and
yeah, right.
they just want to come into a situation where they kind of just lose themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I met I've met a lot of people in all different walks of life,
Mm.
that are all into all different things, and it's interesting to me when I come across a kink I never heard of or something I didn't think of. I'm like, oh, that's just I was introduced to Lunars. I don't know how many years ago, and it's interesting. People like people blowing up balloons and that
Oh, the
whole,
balloon thing. Yeah,
yeah, and that's really cool. I knew a girl who would do that for some guys, and but I was like, I never heard of that. I wouldn't be my thing, but that's cool, man. And I can see like the anticipation of the balloon blowing up, and I can see how that gets to you. I can understand the sense of that, but you go through a clips for sale one afternoon, and you're going to see some stuff that will blow your mind. Wow, I didn't know people were into that.
yeah, yeah.
I
I
always
mean,
thought that was,
one of the benefits of living in a big city like New York, LA, London,
yeah,
that of
yeah,
course we've got kinky clubs, we've
oh
got kinky
yeah,
communities. There's
yes,
lots of people on FetLife, which is kind of
yes,
like the kinky social network, right?
yes, yes,
There's a few other kind of kinky networks, but that's kind of, I suppose, the main one. So, it is, I appreciate that it is harder if you're quite isolated to find like-minded people. Similarly, I think, there's kind of the what I would call almost the vanilla fetishes, right? Which is things like feet, like
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
like how many people I meet that are just really into feet. I don't really get it, but there's thousands of people that just love feet. So if you want to meet somebody who's going to suck your toes, lick your feet, do all of
yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff, fairly easy to find.
absolutely.
I had once answered a crazy ad in Craigslist once by a guy who wanted, I mean, I just did it because it sounded so ridiculous that I just thought, is this even genuine? He wanted me to turn up in his office, sit down in his meeting room, wear a specific type of skirt with a slip underneath and tan colored pantyhose. He wanted me to drop coffee on him. Then he wanted me to remove my skirt, put it over the radiator, go back, sit down in my slip. I had to be wearing big granny panties. I mean, this
Wow.
whole thing was like laid out for me, like a
Wow.
big story, right? And I said to him at the end of it, I said, look, and he didn't want to have sex with me afterwards. So it's
Yeah.
like, that's really okay. That's quite an extensive thing. I'd have to take time off work. It's quite,
Yeah. I gotta find the panties for that. Yeah.
I gotta get some stuff I don't
Right.
own at the moment. Like, so I said to him, how much, I'm gonna have to charge you for this because there's a lot of stuff I'm gonna have to purchase
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
wouldn't have had to purchase otherwise. And he just went, well, how much were you thinking? I said, well, I don't know. I was thinking about 100 pounds, right? For
Yeah.
that. It was the whole thing was going to take like an hour or
Right.
something, right? And he said, wow, that's quite a lot of money. I was like, it's not really negotiable. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
who are you going to find to do this? And
Right.
that's for me when kink gets complicated, right? When people start devising these super elaborate stories that they want someone to play out, and
Yeah.
you're going, what do I have to, like, if I was in a partnership with that guy, like, what would our life look like? Would I have to rock up at his office every week? Like, what would I,
It's
you know,
it
some,
does it gets like it gets tricky to facilitate. And I always think then what we were saying before too, like, so you go through that whole thing and the panties aren't right. And like, does that set, like, does that, you know what? Well, everything worked until you took your skirt off because the panties aren't the ones I wanted. I'm like, or you didn't put your skirt on the thing. I'm like, wow, dude, that's a lot of stuff going on there, like, and look, we all have our stuff. I mean, we all have our particulars, and I
yeah,
understand that details that get to you that you really want.
yeah,
It's got to be a girl from the 50s. If it's not a girl from the 50s, I understand all that, but the more complicated it is, and even when you're in a partnership with somebody like you just said, the more you have more you have a chance of it running off the rails.
yeah, of course.
You remember, I always go back to, you remember the scene at the end of Carnal Knowledge when Jack Nicholson comes to see Rita Moreno, who's playing a prostitute,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Jack Nicholson's been through all this stuff in the movie, trying to wheedle his way through sexual relationships. And at the end of the movie, he sits down in a chair and he's laying back, and she's obviously starting to hand manipulate him, but she's
yeah,
talking to him very sexy.
yeah,
And then she says one thing, and he goes, "That's it." And he gets up all this. You said the wrong thing, and it was interesting. And I always go back to that, like, if you're playing with that many details and that specificity, you can get thrown off the rails pretty easily.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's for me. I know that that's the biggest danger for me with role play. And I think that's,
Yeah.
for me, there's one overall lesson when it comes to kink, right? Which is it's very rarely going to be 100% the way you want it, right?
Well,
Because
absolutely.
you've got all this shit that goes on in your head, and you've been wanking off to that for years, and you've created this whole elaborate story, and
Hmm.
you've thought, okay, you know what, I can do this now. I'm going to move it out of my head now, whether you
Hmm.
pay for someone to do that or whether you
Hmm.
find someone on a kink site, whatever. The reality is that when I asked somebody to play doctor and he put his stethoscope in the wrong place, I just was like, I just went,
Yeah.
yeah, see, you just fucked it all up now.
Right, right. Yeah, like, yeah, because and the things and that could be the smallest little detail that you go,
Yeah,
oh, oh,
totally. Just ruined it.
yeah,
Just
you
ruined
ruined,
it.
like, oh wow, dude, we were going along good, but then you brought out the brown stethoscope and not the black one. I'm like, and it's just so, it was just something you said too that make me think of something, but it's true. I mean, those little moments where you go, that just, I'm sorry, I gotta take a powder on this one because it didn't deliver, and that happens because you get stuck in a weird thing, the way it's got to go or the way it has to go,
Yeah, yeah.
and like we said before too, sometimes you get surprised. See, that's another thing too. there's that their term we hear this term all the time about topping from below, especially if you're the sub, you want it a certain way, but then you don't want to be leading the dom because the dom doesn't want that. But then also I think like in those instances, what's fun in those instances, and I'm sure this has been true for you, is that when you're with somebody, whether they're a friend or a partner or whatever, and they kind of pick up on the stuff that you don't exactly say,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
they bring you to there, and you're like, oh, I really did want that, but I never thought about it, or B, I would never dared say it, And now she is putting on the strap on, and I would never have said it to her, but now she is, and I'm like, good for you, girl, because that's really where I wanted. So that's the fun thing about not being so rigid in the fantasy.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's a couple of, a few things that we said that are very worth reminding most of our audience who are probably quite not kinky, but
Mm.
you never know, is one, that sometimes those fantasies are best left in your head,
Oh yeah, oh
because
yeah.
if you're thinking that it's all going to go 100% your way, you're going to be disappointed.
I wish
Two,
it was the case, but it doesn't
you
go that way.
know, but it just doesn't.
No.
Two is that things that may seem inappropriate with two consenting adults who love and trust each other, don't have to love each other, just trust each other,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
can be super duper fun, and they don't have to send you off to this therapist. They're just
Yes,
you can call
yes.
your younger lover daddy, and it's fine, right?
Doesn't mean shit.
Doesn't mean shit. And the third thing is that it's a wonderfully inclusive world if you want to dip your toe into it. So age is not a barrier. It's just it's in fact, there's loads and loads and loads of older people on the scene, who some of whom are very experienced and some of whom are newbies. So if you're thinking you're too old to do any of this stuff that we've talked about, never too old, never too
No,
old,
no,
never too
and you may find things that you never even thought about and say, "Oh, that's interesting." And then again, like you said, with trust, it's good to be protected in those instances, because if you do traipse across something that unnerves you a bit, although you like it, but it unnerves you a bit, it's good to have a partner with you that can you could talk it out with. That's all.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, very valuable point. Thank you for raising it, is be safe. So
Yeah.
don't go and meet somebody you've never met before in a hotel room.
Oof.
I've done
Yeah.
stupid shit like that, but
You and me both. You and me both.
but,
Yes, absolutely.
and like
No, and more, and I hate to say it this way, but the fairer sex, you run the risk way back in the day more than I did. But then that's not necessarily true either. A woman could tie me down and it's all over, man.
yeah,
You know,
exactly. I mean, I did
very
once in
careful.
my teens tie down a couple of guys and just left. So,
Right, right. But
but
that's
they
what they wanted.
But they, yeah, exactly. They did. And I was young and I didn't know anything about that then, but I do now. Less said about that, the better, really. Anyway, and so it's been such a blast to talk to you. I
Back
could,
at you.
yeah. So that's Ralph Greco. Licking Non-Vanilla is his podcast. We'll put all the links in the summary as usual. You are
Yes.
a delightful man, and I hear you're in Jersey or something, aren't you?
New Jersey.
New
Yeah.
Jersey.
I'm like 20 minutes out of New York City, actually. Yep.
Oh, so
Mhm.
maybe the next time I go to New York City, we can meet up, because that'd be fun.
Not there's no maybe there involved. There's a definite. There's a definite. We're gonna hang out. We're gonna paint the paint. Well, you know what? Now New York, the problem is congestion pricing. You go in, it's so expensive just to run around that city.
Oh, I know. My son
Yeah,
lives there. It's
it's
ridiculous.
terrible. Anyway, it was wonderful. I thank you so much. This could not have been better. It was wonderful.
Thank you.